Hey everybody, it's Shadowstar here for another anime review. This time I'll be reviewing the short-lived anime series Soul Eater. Not a brand new anime, but an anime I just finished recently watching. For reference sake, as I get into this review, I'll only be reviewing it as the anime. Obviously, the anime, like most, there is a corresponding manga, but I haven't really read it, so don't expect if there's major deviations in the story. Obviously, I won't be referencing those. I'll just be focusing on how things are presented in the anime. And also, if there's any purists out there, yes, of course, I watched the dub, not the subbed version. Sorry, but that's okay because, like some anime, this is a very well done dub which manages to keep all the characters feeling alive and fresh. All in all, this show is a show which has quite a few characters, and most of them get to be shown off pretty well. It's a show where, at first, it takes you a little while to get to know some of the characters, but once you do, end up loving most of the characters. Honestly, most of the characters I either loved or some were just kind of there, but that's kind of the way the show goes. Obviously, our main character is actually Maka. That's the first thing I love about this show, is I love the fact that this show, I'm sorry if it sounds cliche or a little silly, but I just love a show with an epic protagonist that's a girl. And they don't just make her, haha, girl boss. No, they just make her a girl. But she has amazing fight scenes. She has cute moments. She's friendly. She's a great, well-rounded character. But she does also have epic fight scenes. She has internal struggles. All in all, she's exactly a perfect female protagonist. And I like that too, because when you first watch the show, like in the first episode or two, you could be mistaken for thinking Soul is going to be the main character. And to be fair, he kind of is. It's almost a two-person protagonist situation, but she definitely gets most of the attention, especially obviously with, spoiler alert in case people are worried. Of course, near the end, she also ends up being the big hero at the very end, but she just has so many good moments. I love her design. I love her friendly moments. She gets to form a great friendship with a certain character, which I love, which we'll get into more. She has, it starts off with her being sort of the calm, reasonable one in a group full of idiots, but then near the end, other characters take on the more calm role, and then she has to she's the one getting into action, and she's the one getting more aggressive as the stakes get higher and she's got more to fight for. I love that. You kind of see a shift in certain characters, and she's one of them. She has some amazing moments. She has, obviously, the epic fight near the end is great. There's the epic fight against, I forget the name of it, but the butler-looking dude, when all three of them are fighting. She has an amazing fight scene against that guy. It's not much of a fight scene, but, well, we get her initial, quote, fight with Krona, but then the secondary fight where first we start off with the scene where she lets the black blood take her, and she completely becomes unhinged. I wish she became unhinged just a little bit longer, because it's so fun to watch a girl character just become unhinged. I just love crazy characters like that. So that was a fun moment when it happened to her. But at the same time, it also leads into a great moment which develops more into her friendship, which I'll definitely touch on more in a minute. But otherwise, she's just a character where, as time went on, she became more and more of my favorite. I don't know if I'd say she's my favorite. She's probably not my favorite, because, I still love her, but she's not my favorite. There's two other characters I love more. One, because they're fun, the other, because they're a really good character. But Maka is probably well up there. But speaking of characters who had lots of attention, it's Soul. Pretty much the namesake of the show, but at first, he was just kind of a very generic character. To be fair, most of them were. When you first watch an anime, characters can seem a little generic. He's your typical anime protagonist dude, but he's fine. Especially once you realize that Maka is more of the main character, Soul becomes more interesting too, as you realize that at first it seems like, oh, they don't really get along, and they bicker a bit, but in the end, they have each other's back more than anything. He defends her to the earth. And like I said, with Maka becoming more headstrong and Maka becoming more gung-ho near the end of the show, he actually becomes a bit more of the level-headed one at times. He's sometimes the level-headed one who has to rein Maka in or put some perspective into her or some of the other characters that were going on. But at the same time, despite him being this cool, calm, and collected guy, he's got his own inner story, which is kind of hiding from the rest of the characters, where, he was the one who was infected with the black blood, so he's got this kind of literal inner demon trying to take hold of him, and it kind of have a bit of a back and forth. They sometimes come to agreements, sometimes he'll let it come out for a bit to get some power, and then it kind of takes him over. I like this little back and forwards, whereas the other weapon characters don't have much going on. Here's the one character who actually has quite a bit of a storyline, a bit of an internal situation whenever there's a fight scene, or you always get that inner monologue where there's a fight scene and it's just him off in his kind of void, whereas most of the other weapon characters, although they're delightful, they don't have much to them. Let's move on to Black Star, a character you either love or find really annoying, or a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both. He's a character he was just kind of there, then he became super annoying, but then it's a case where when you do a joke or a thing so many times, it actually becomes even more funny. That's when he grows on you. When he became when at first you think, oh god, he's getting annoying, but then it kind of grows on you, and you kind of get a little bit of an attachment to his outlandishness. He's incredibly aggressive, incredibly arrogant. Like, he's the peak definition. He's almost a parody of any super aggressive ego maniac protagonist that there is in an anime. He's all of them piled into one. His Gotenks turned up to 11. He's all those characters turned up. And that's so fun. He doesn't have too many deep story moments, except for that one moment I love where him and Tsubaki go to this village, and he's protecting Tsubaki while she's inside the sword, and he doesn't really care that the villagers are attacking him. He's just sitting there, and all the villagers are just attacking him and getting pissed off at him, and he's just sitting there. But the moment they go off to Tsubaki, he snaps and goes insane. And then he just goes back to sitting down again, and he just doesn't care. I love how determined he was in that one episode. But otherwise, he's just insane. But I like that because it blends well. You've got to have the crazy character that blends kind of with the cool and collected characters like Tsubaki or Kid or some of the other characters who have to put up with him. Tsubaki, this is where I get into what I was saying. The weapon characters don't actually get to do as much except for Soul. Tsubaki's just kind of there. She's occasionally a little bit of a conscious or gives a little bit of a perspective on Black Star, but half the time she gets to do almost nothing. Out of all the main 7 characters, I feel like she's the least developed. There's that one episode where she learns how to become inside the enchanted sword, and she gets and it feels like we're going to get a little bit of history about her, but that's about it. She doesn't really do anything outside of that one episode. She's just kind of there. Granted, there's no characters I hate or anything, but she's just one that's kind of there, and you barely remember she's there. Speaking of characters who are sometimes run by a gag, you've got Death the Kid. At first, he's very much a cool and calm and collected person, which I love. I love a character who's very cool and calm and collected. He's most of the time the most mature of all of them in the group. He is the most mature of them. He is the most reasonable of them, but he does have his moments. Those moments where he actually has to fight, he becomes ruthless. But he is kind of ruled by a bit of a joke, and you'll either find that joke really fun, or you'll just kind of find it kind of tiresome. Like, it's funny once or twice, and they sprinkle it in to make it look like he's got OCD or some other fixation, but they keep referencing his love of symmetry so much that it almost becomes silly. But I do like when they kind of take that silly joke and run with it. Those moments where he's on edge and he has to be kind of pushed and said, hey, look, you could fight this enemy and kill this enemy because they're asymmetrical. I like when they kind of take the silly joke that you're getting tired of and at least do something with it. But otherwise, that silly joke gets annoying, but they do tone it down. I noticed near the second half of the show, they tone that gag down, and he just becomes more of the cool, calm, and collected kind of stoic character who reins everybody in, has a bit more of a neutral perspective on everything. He's a bit more skeptical, and he goes well with the characters he's paired with. His characters being Patty and Liz. Now, like the other weapons, you could argue they're just kind of there. The fact is, he's got two weapons, so you get more of a back and forwards. They're kind of an opposite dynamic. Liz is kind of mostly calm and mostly mature, is the one to speak a bit more, but she does have her moments because she's actually the one who's more scared. She's actually the one who's more vulnerable. Whereas Patty is just adorable. Like, there's pretty much no substance to her character, but she's adorable. One of my favorite scenes is in an otherwise filler episode where, like, they're doing some exam. And Saul's kind of stuck in the middle. He's really trying. And he's stuck between two people. He keeps looking to the left at both Kid and Patty. Kid is stuck because he's trying to draw in his name, which I love that because that's something we've all probably done in class. And then he keeps looking over at Patty. At first, it just looks like she's just scribbling in crayon. And then she keeps saying the word giraffe over and over again. You're like, what is she doing? And then, at the end, it turns out she's somehow turned all her papers into a 3D origami of a giant giraffe. I don't know why. I love that little funny moment. Again, it's a little random humor. Because again, this show, it can have lots of humorous moments. It can have lots of epic anime moments. It can have slightly cringy anime moments. It can just have delightful characters with humorous moments. But also, it has deep moments. Which brings us to the extra protagonist, so to speak. A character who starts as kind of a villain and leads into a protagonist. Because let's face it, every show needs that villain turned protagonist. And here we have Krona. A character which I have a feeling is very popular for multiple reasons. First off, they are cute. They are adorable because everyone loves got that kind of shy, reserved character. That kind of shy, reserved character with a tragic backstory who ties in with the villain. Their backstory is obviously very tragic. Krona is a character where you first see them and you think, what is with this character? They're slightly off because they're kind of flip-flopping in their first introductory episodes. They're kind of shy, but they're also kind of unhinged. And that unhinged moment fades away later when the black blood gets not cured but kind of reduced. But at first, they're unhinged, and it feels like they're tormented because their weapon is fused with them. And at first it feels like their weapon is in control. And they are. Ragnarok is in control. And so is the villain Medusa. But then as things go on, you start to realize there's more to this character. We should feel a bit more sympathetic for this character. At first, you get that showdown when we first meet them. Then there's one where like we're on a pirate ship with Kid. And then of course they show up at the halfway mark when we're trying to stop the Kishin from being unleashed. That is the turning point of Krona. It is that episode where, like I said, where Maka gets exposed to the black blood, and at first she's unhinged, but then she's kind of able to go inside Krona's mind. We get flashbacks to how Medusa would absolutely abuse Krona, and how Medusa was happy to just toss Krona aside. And yet, Krona still kind of looks up to Medusa, but if push comes to shove, they're willing to follow Medusa, at least until the very end, which says so much. They're a character that I'm sure, in some way or another, lots of people can relate to. There's a really good scene where we're kind of in Krona's mind, and we see Krona kind of shown as a kid, or at least, portrayed as a kid. And they're very shy, insecure. They do that thing where like they draw a circle in the sand and they say, "This is my circle." They keep speaking this very cute and shy, reserved voice, saying they don't know how to deal with things, and they panic when people break in. There's this really good scene I love where like this kind of, I guess you could say, an embodiment of themselves or an embodiment of their insecurities or whatever you want to refer to it, keeps talking to them and asking questions like, "I'm just going to ask you basic questions and you can pass if you want." And every time he's just like, pass, pass. And then, but in the end, after all that unhinged fighting, Krona and Maka become friends. And we get that great fish out of water moment, because then you get the villain turned protagonist, and you get the fish out of water moment where Krona kind of gets introduced to the group. They're still very, very shy and reserved. They can panic with some of the more aggressive characters like Black Star. But, and then but like I said, push comes to shove, they still end up faltering and falling for Medusa, which means they betray the group, which then leads to a great moment where they're running away and they feel bad about everything and they confess to everything. And it's that great moment with Maka and Krona in the hole in the sand where, you think Maka's going to be pissed off. And some of the other characters are pissed off at them for betraying them. But Maka doesn't. Maka looks past everything because because she knows just how much Krona has been through and how easy it is for Krona to turn. And Krona is obviously a character that is going to be super popular in the fandom. Popular for people who feel insecure, people who feel a bit shy, people who've come from abusive backgrounds, people who are gender norm conforming, because this is a character who is blatantly non-binary. In the Japanese version, I'm well aware that their gender is pretty much non-specified. The creator has straight up said multiple times that they never want to officially state the gender. And although the English dub unfortunately does use the word he, the characters are still a little bit confused. And I've heard that the English prints of the manga, future reprints, no longer refer to them as he and kept referring to him as they in future reprints. It feels like something where, had Soul Eater been aired a decade later, Krona would have straight up been non-binary, or at least used they pronouns. It did air a decade before, before using they as a pronoun was super common. Not to say it was never unused, but it wasn't nearly as used in English, so had it happened more recently, that would have easily been something they did. Anyway, moving on, we've got the villains, and they're kind of hit or miss. Obviously, despite not being the main villain of the show, Medusa is probably the villain who gets the most focused. We see them quite a few times. First, we see them kind of infiltrating the school. They form a kind of connection with Stein. Yes, we have a character called Professor Stein, I know. But we saw them form this connection with Stein. There's that moment where they're dancing. There's that epic fight scene when they're trying to stop the Kishin, where it's a back and forth between Stein and Medusa, and Medusa really is trying to make Stein unhinged. And it works. Thanks to Krona's help, it works, where eventually Medusa gets through to Stein. Obviously, it all breaks down in the end, but still. But then obviously, like we said, Medusa is the mother of Krona, so obviously you've got that connection where now, when we want to stop Medusa near the end, we have that personal tie, where Krona wants to stop her, where Maka wants to stop her. We get way more personal ties with Medusa than we do with pretty much any other villain, so it makes it justifiable when we face down. I wish that fight scene between Krona and Medusa had a bit more of Krona standing up for themselves, but at least the justifying moment is when Maka's about to die and Krona takes a hit, and you very much would assume that Krona's gonna die in that moment. So it's still a good moment. I just wish there was just a teensy bit more standing up for themselves, but it's still, I guess, that's a moment where actions speak louder than words. Obviously, also, like I said, going back to the stopping the Kishin fight, there's that moment where you think, oh, Stein has killed Medusa, but then they escape in a snake, and then they take over a body of a child. And what's funny is, we just kind of accept it. Like, it's horrifying that the child just walks out, and near the end, they bring up, oh, wait, Medusa's in a kid body, but for a while, Medusa's just walking around, and the show just kind of stops showing us the family, and we're like, I guess we just kind of forget what happened to the kid's family. Eventually that gets solved, but it is kind of hilarious. I do like near the end, I do like her in that form because there's something funny about an evil kid character. Well, I mean, she's not an evil kid character, but there is something delightful about a small evil character who They can have their cute moments. That moment where you think they're sort of joining sides with the school, but well, we know they're not going to, but you can see that they're playing the long game and they're confronting death. And I love that moment. It's just they mix it in with such humor, but you also remember she's a villain. I love when villains get completely humiliated because you've got this evil, ruthless villain going, having a conversation with Death, who vast majority of the time Death is portrayed as humorous, which obviously is something else we also love. For the most part, he's played as humorous, which I love a character like Death, where they're portrayed as humorous, but in a few select moments, we show they can be serious, but we reserve it for those sweet special moments. Unfortunately, the second half of the show makes it feel like the main villain is going to be Arachnid, but she just kind of doesn't do anything. Her army has a few interesting characters, like the butler character or the guy who faces Blackstar, but her herself, she doesn't do much, and then she gets killed by Nikishin near the end anyway. The show kind of focuses on Nikishin, stops, focuses on Arachnid, and then he usurps the position. Now it's a case of, we're going to stop Nikishin, he breaks free, then we kind of forget about him and focus on Arachnid. Then he's teaming up with Arachnid, then he kills her, and then we get the epic fight. Now, that fight was really amazing. First, you get Nikishin showing up at the school, and there's some amazing dialogue between him and some other characters, where, because he's insane and unhinged, he has some really good philosophical speeches about what is fear and what is insecurities, and how insanity, he kind of uses the justification that insanity leads to no fear, because insanity must form from because fear must form from a logic. So if you're insane, you have no fear. The fear of death has nothing if you're insane. There's some really good lines, and I wish I could remember them, but he had some really good philosophical lines, both against Death and also against a few other characters like Excalibur, which we'll get into in a minute. Then we got an absolutely epic fight scene, because, Nikishin, Ashura, and Death have a history. And so they go toe-to-toe. It's the first time you get to see Death do anything, because it's a clever writing tactic where you have this character who, they're always established to be super duper strong. They're always established to be the greatest power we can get. And yet, they make the great writing choice of saying, well, they're grounded to the school and the city, so they can't go on missions. But the one time the fight is brought to the school, they can actually do stuff, and we get to see some amazing fight scenes. And yet, Nikishin defeats him. Well, he's not dead. Almost no protagonist dies in the show. But you could be mistaken. In that moment, you genuinely could think that Death is dead, and it would have made for a great character moment. There's two times where your characters think, holy shit, are they really going to kill Death, or are they really going to kill Krona? They don't, but for brief moments, you really genuinely think they could, and it would have made for interesting character moments. But Death is a fun character. Death is a fun character. He's mostly portrayed as goofy, but we know he's powerful, we know he's in charge, but we know he can also be super duper powerful. We love a character where they're meant to be we love a character where they're meant to be this crazy powerful character, but they're also kind of wacky or humorous, so characters are supposed to take them seriously, but at the same time, like, all the characters take him seriously, but I also know he can be wacky, and it leads to some good humorous moments. All in all, the characters are very well-rounded. You got Maka, the main protagonist, who's delightful. Sol had some good journeys near the end. Blackstar's insane. Everything he does is star-themed, which made me laugh, of course. Like, his fast attack is called Speed Star, or his sneaking attack was called Shadow Star, which I, of course, had to find hilarious. You've got adorable characters like Patty and Liz, you've got cool characters like Kid, you've got characters which everyone's going to cling on to, like Krona. I swear, not so much for the humor, but I feel like Krona is sort of the paradox of this show. Not in the humor department, but in the fact that they're a character that's going to let that a lot of either neurodivergent people or gender diverse people or people with bad backgrounds are just going to latch onto. And then you got characters where most of the villain's good. Medusa is amazing as a villain. They're not the main villain, but she's amazing as a villain, that she keeps coming back. Every moment she's on screen, you're watching her. Arachnid kind of fell to the wayside, but Kishin was unhinged and yet strangely philosophical. And we got some good side characters. Stein's a good side character. His relationship, or kind of dynamic he has with Medusa, was fun. They're kind of back and forwards, but that's about it. When you first meet him, you think, oh god, he's unhinged, but it turns out he's just messing around. There's other characters, like Sid, you think, oh god, he's unhinged, but he just becomes a main character. I like that everyone just kind of becomes a main character, and this show has a good revolving world of great characters. Then you've got a character who, anytime they appear, it is a pure comedy episode. Excalibur, a character you think is either annoying, fun, or a bit of both. It's a character who appeared about 3 times, once in the introduction, once in some other, basically a filler episode, and near the end. There's this moment near the end where, like, kids walking up to the castle, you see this beam of light go to the castle, and then the sword just shows up and you go, oh, it's just Excalibur. But that's what I like, is although the final fight scene came down to our main 7, all the other characters got to at least be there. Other characters like Sid got to help with the fighting. Stein got to be there near the end to help fight Medusa, you know? And all of them got to, I'd say, observe the fight, but they weren't really watching. They were just kind of standing, offering commentary. I like the fact that Excalibur is there to observe. He's literally just there because the writers probably just wanted some comedy, or thought, we miss Excalibur, let's give him some wacky comedy. So let's put her in the scene. Let's put Excalibur in the scene. Let's put the cat girl in the scene. A character who's barely done anything, is mostly used for humor. But the 2 times I loved when she showed up is at the midway point where everyone's got their own little fight going on, and you think, who else could show up? And then it's a cat girl versus the mice girls, and it's like everyone's involved. I love a everyone is here moment, and the cat girl did that. But then, you know, I love the finale where everyone's here. Most of them are off to the side, but I love that we just have this ragtag group of a peanut gallery where you just have like Excalibur and a cat girl and Death and Krona and everyone just observing the fight. Everyone gets their last little bit to chip in at the end. I even love the fact that, you know, after the big epic fight with Death, Kishin is still there talking and Excalibur is just stood there. I also love the fact that Excalibur is said to be this all-powerful weapon, but we never see him do anything. It would have been cool if he did something even just for a millisecond against the Kishin, but he does have some good moments where he's not afraid to actually talk to the Kishin, and the Kishin doesn't care. The Ashura just kind of doesn't care about Excalibur. Like, he's not going to kill him, he doesn't go after him, he actually converses with him for a few seconds and gets philosophical. I love it. The ending was so well crafted. I love that they truly let Maka be the hero, and all the other characters got to have epic moments. By all the others, I mean the people who aren't weapons. Because again, as much as I love them, Patty and Liz don't get to do much, and Sabaki really doesn't do much. But all the other characters get some amazing story. Every character, this show is a show where they manage to shuffle it around. They don't throw everything all at once, but they'll kind of take turns giving one character a bit of screen time. So it's like, okay, here, we'll have a bit of development for Krona. Then we'll pause, give an episode to Blackstar. Pause, give an episode to maybe Soul. Pause, give an episode to so-and-so. And we just keep rolling. All in all, there's not much to hate about this show. I love it. A couple of characters fell to the wayside, but considering it's a show of only 50 episodes, it was a very good, short-lived show, and that's what I love. There was no point where I was bored. There was no point where I'm thinking, what's going on? It's a show that kind of throws everything at you, even in the beginning. Like, it's a show that hinges on being wacky. Its theme songs, by the way, are amazing. I will say the first half of the show's theme and opening I prefer, but both are good. I love the first one way more, but the first one is good, because it just really sums up this absolutely batshit insane world we got, where things are just weird for the sake of being weird, and that's what I love. I love a show that's not afraid to be weird, and yet can have some deep, deep moments. There are some shows like that where they're like, okay, we'll have deep moments, but we'll also just be completely silly, or have epic fights, and have a bit of everything. And that's what it does. I am so glad I've watched this show. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough. I think I've gone over every character, every story beat, the show's kind of split down the middle into two parts, and both of the epic fights and climaxes were really good. Like I said, pretty much all the characters are well rounded. There's no character where like, oh no, not this guy. No, I love them all. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough. So, with that being said, I will see you next time for more reviews and other things as well. See you next time, guys.